Now we're going to go to our final story here, which is about breaking points. If you have not seen this, you are about to see it now. So Crystal and Sauger did have a take here about the concessions that the Freedom Caucus group from the GOP were able to gain through their terms of forcing the vote. They actually decided to do it, and the squad did not. I'm going to show you what they had to say. This is actually what we're going to talk about on Call-In tonight, because I understand, and I want to come and say this before I start this clip. I understand that you may not agree with the concessions that the Freedom Caucus got from Kevin McCarthy. And that's totally fine. I don't agree with all the concessions either. But the point that a lot of us are trying to make is not necessarily about what they got. It's about the fact that they used a force the vote strategy that was supposed to be used by the squad on the left, and they actually did it and got something for their vote. So let's go ahead and get into this clip here. I have so much to say.
Crystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, now that the first battle in the great GOP rebellion of 2023 is complete, what the hell was it actually all about? What did the rebels want? What did they win? What will it mean for all of us? After all, at times during the fight, it was actually a little hard to discern exactly what the asks were, what principles were really at stake, especially since the 20 holdouts weren't a united front, but rather a collection of different ambitions and grievances. This confusion was exacerbated by the fact that the two sides were both led by sort of pseudo-Trumpian figures. Kevin McCarthy was directly endorsed by Trump, of course, and had as one of his top allies Marjorie Taylor Greene, a woman who has not found a Trump delusion she would not embrace. And the 20 rebels were led by Matt Gaetz, a pugilist whose natural gifts as a genuine asshole have made him a natural for the Trumpian political aesthetic. The media largely treated this fight as if it was something totally new, totally different. And to be sure, we haven't had a speaker fight this lengthy in 100 years. But as the dust settles on this...
I got to pause there already. I'm sorry. I think we're 51 seconds in. To me, it doesn't matter if the people who forced the vote were all aligned with Donald Trump or not. That's irrelevant to me at this point. What matters is the fact that they were willing to do it. So I don't care. It could have been anyone deciding to come on board and say, wait a minute, let's not vote for dude until we get something from him. So the Trump point to me is irrelevant. I don't care. I don't care. Sorry.
New GOP House majority, it seems to me most of the lines of this fight weren't actually ones set down by Trump in 2016, but by the Tea Party back in 2010 and by the Koch radical libertarian wing and Barry Goldwater before that. Yeah, there are a few Trump-era twists that are new and different, and frankly, these are the only pieces which are interesting and not terrible. The potential defense spending cuts, the deep state investigation, which Sauger is digging into in his monologue. But the overwhelming bulk of the concessions are actually antithetical to Trump's 2016 break from GOP economic orthodoxy.
Let's go back here for a second because she's talking really fast and I don't want you to miss what's being said.
Back in 2010 and by the Koch radical libertarian wing and Barry Goldwater before that. Yeah, there are a few Trump-era twists that are new and different, and frankly, these are the only pieces which are interesting and not terrible. The potential defense spending cuts, the deep state investigation, which Sauger is digging into in his monologue. But
that part right there. So she mentions how some of these concessions, or a few of them, are pretty positive things, but she goes on to say that overwhelmingly they're not. The rest of them don't really mean anything. She actually mentions reducing the defense budget, which is one of the things that they were holding out for. And the other one was, hold on one second, I just missed that. So, I don't know what happened there. I think I went back.
Crystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well,
reducing the defense budget was one of the ones that she mentioned. And there was another one that I just missed. I just want you to pay attention.
Radical libertarian wing and Barry Goldwater before that. Yeah, there are a few Trump-era twists that are new and different, and frankly, these are the only pieces which are interesting and not terrible. The potential defense spending cuts, the deep state investigation, which Sauger is digging into in his model.
The defense budget cuts and the deep state investigation. She then proceeds to gloss over it as though that's not a big deal. She doesn't even go, you're going to see the rest of the interview, but even in the rest of this segment, she doesn't even go on to explain why those are actually significant wins. Let me be real and very clear here. I don't care what side you're on. If you're for reducing the defense budget, that is a huge win. Huge. Cut it. I've been for that. For those of you who, try to argue with me and say, you don't want us to have these social programs because you don't want to be taxed more. I understand that. I've heard from you guys' opinion about not being taxed more. Totally get that. But if we were to reduce the defense budget, you wouldn't have to worry about that. They approved over $800 billion for the defense budget. We are not at war. And I talked about this recently on Jimmy Dore's segment. Actually, Aaron was hosting, but it was on Jimmy Dore's show, is that if you look at the graphs, you look at the data, the defense budget has increased since 2011, which was the end of the Iraq war. When they pull out, it has increased steadily since then. And now it's to the point where it's over 800 billion, but we are not at war. So why is the defense budget higher now than it was when we were actually literally at war? To make money for these weapon contractors, to make money for companies like Lockheed Martin, to make money for companies like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman. But notice how she just glossed over and is like, this is no big deal. The deep state investigation, that again is a huge big deal. I don't understand how you can just say that and then take the focus off of it and, okay, let's focus on all these things that they asked for that is not worth it. Because I want to be very clear. I'm not Republican or Democrat. I left the Democratic Party. The squad was my last hope. But I don't see the Democrats trying to cut the defense budget. I don't see the Democratic Party. Where's the squad? Because they've been voting on increasing this budget. They've been voting on approvals to send 40 billion, another 40 billion, another 50 billion. It's $100 billion gone out the door to Ukraine, and the squad has approved those budgets. So here you have a couple of Republicans who said, no, we need to cut this defense budget. This is bullshit. What is happening here? I don't understand how you gloss over that in that moment.
But the overwhelming bulk of the concessions are actually antithetical to Trump's 2016 break from GOP economic orthodoxy. Remember, back then he was the guy who trashed the neoliberal consensus of trade deals and deficit hawks and would-be Social Security cuts. But now with this fight, we're officially back to 2010 with all its hostage taking over spending cuts and demands to slash social spending, including potentially Social Security and Medicare.
Now, I do not agree with cutting Social Security and Medicare, obviously, but let's be real. The Republicans have been talking about doing this way before this whole force the vote strategy came up with Kevin McCarthy. They have been talking about this way before. So it's not like this was new. I expected this to happen. Okay.
There's nothing new about these politics, and they sure as hell are not populist. But this is predictably exactly what you get when you have a party that under Trump embraced vibes and aesthetics more than actual political content.
Two things. Did they ever say that they were populist? I don't remember them saying that. So that's one thing. And the other thing, when she said you have like basically this caucus here that is just based on vibe and aesthetics, isn't that the same thing the squad is? Because the squad is like all vibes, bro. Feel me, bro? Yeah, man. I'm for Medicare for all, bro. Yeah, dude. Totally for it. Not gonna fight for it though. Just vibes. Just vibes. Isn't that what the squad does? The same thing. The only difference is this group actually fought for what they wanted. The squad didn't.
Because there are a million DC orcs and billions of dollars ready to fill your empty vessel with the anti-tax, pro-plutocrat, starve the poor's ideology that has been haunting this town for decades now. Let me be a little bit specific here about these concessions, at least what we know of them and what they ultimately will mean. Remember, since Democrats hold the Senate and the White House, the most critical action in the session is going to be on items where the House and the Senate must actually act together in order to keep the basics of government operating. So basically, the whole game here is the debt ceiling and the government budgeting process. If the debt ceiling doesn't get lifted, economic chaos could ensue. If the government...
According to MMT, the debt ceiling isn't even a real thing. I highly recommend, and Steve Grumbine has been on to talk about it. Dr. Kaboub has been on to talk about MMT. If you are not familiar with modern monetary theory, I highly recommend that you check out Real Progressives. They talk about this a lot. Check out the macro cheese podcast also with Steve Grumbine. They talk about this a lot. I just have to put that out there. When people mention debt ceiling, according to MMT, the debt ceiling is a myth. Let's go on.
Doesn't get funded, it shuts down, with huge ramifications for basic societal functioning. The concessions given by McCarthy make it much more likely that ordinary Americans will suffer because of radical anti-government ideologues. In fact, many of the 20
Let's go back to the government shutdown, because I have something to say about that. I think she said this right about here.
The whole game here is the debt ceiling and the government budgeting process. If the debt ceiling doesn't get lifted, economic chaos could ensue. If the government doesn't get funded, it shuts down, with huge ramifications for basic societal functioning. The concessions given by McCarthy make it much more likely that ordinary Americans will suffer because of radical anti-government ideologues. In fact,
ordinary Americans were suffering before McCarthy, before Trump, before any of this. Ordinary Americans have been suffering my whole life. So it's like when Ro Khanna told me, think of all the things that the Democratic Party has done, Sabrina. And he mentioned things like Social Security and Medicare, the New Deal. And I'm over here sitting like, none of those things happened during my lifetime. You're talking like decades ago, dude. None of that shit happened during my lifetime. What has the Democratic Party done since I've been alive? Let's go on.
Many of the 20 who are opposing McCarthy were explicit that their core demand was a pledge that McCarthy would use the debt ceiling fight to hold the entire nation hostage in the name of fiscal austerity. South Carolina Republican Ralph Norman said that he would never vote for McCarthy until he was willing to shut the government down rather than raise the debt ceiling. He described it as a non-negotiable item. A letter that was sent by 7 of the holdouts last month, they demanded that a debt ceiling showdown occur and that they balance the budget in 10 years. Even if they actually follow through on a defense budget cut, the bulk of the spending cuts are going to come from vital and popular programs, things like Medicare and Social Security, that make up significant chunks of the federal budget.
Which I disagree with cutting those social programs, but at the same time, notice again how she's glossing over the defense budget cut. This is what happened to Breaking Points? What happened to this show? When this show first started, or when it was announced that it was happening, I was excited. I was like, wow, they're leaving the Hill. They're finally going completely like independent. I was like, this is going to be cool. And then like, as time went by, the talking points just started to sound more and more like neocons. I felt like I was listening to MSNBC. It almost seemed like Screen Arts Media said they moved right. It almost seemed like they were actually more populist, or they pushed back more on establishment narratives when they were a part of Rising. What happened to this show? Jeremy said, I think they were bought. I really feel like what she says here is what I heard on mainstream media. I don't get it.
Dramatically unpopular agenda appears to be exactly what the radicals have ultimately won. McCarthy agreed to change the process for passing spending bills in a way that empowers the most anti-government radicals. He also pledged to send the country into economic crisis rather than lift the debt ceiling with no spending cuts. For the rebels, going to war with DC elites might be popular, but the actual provisions that they were warring over are decidedly not. Republicans know this, by the way, when Rick Scott floated a similar program as head of the NRSC.
When she calls them rebels, and I've seen mainstream media call them this as well, it's like we need to be careful with the rhetoric, because that is the same term that I've heard CNN and MSNBC use to refer to the squad. Rebellious, rebels, far left extremists. So for me, like, I'm not trying to use the same rhetoric as mainstream media. Let's go on.
Republicans who actually wanted to win elections, like Mitch McConnell, trashed him for it, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Now they're implementing exactly the unpopular agenda that they tried desperately to run away from back then. Additional reported concessions have to do with power. Any single caucus member can now call essentially a vote of no confidence on McCarthy. The powerful Rules Committee, which effectively governs how legislating occurs, that's going to be dominated by hard right Freedom Caucus members.
So this one right here, this is when we're going to talk about the rules package, what they actually got. One member can force the vote to overthrow a speaker. Guys, that's huge. We should have had that on the, listen, the Democrats should have had something like that. Now, you may wonder, why would this be important to some of the Republicans there? It could have something to do with going back to the days when Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House. I do remember Paul Ryan, for whatever reason, was not liked as Speaker of the House. And it wasn't so easily just to come in and remove him. So one of the things that they're pointing out here that they did get from McCarthy is that now one member can force the vote to overthrow the speaker. That's actually a huge win. And I don't see why you wouldn't want that on the Democrat side either. Because if the Speaker of the House is not doing a good job, then they got to go. But if you have all these rules in place that prevent that from happening, they end up staying there. So I consider that one to be a win. Let's go on. Oh, let me mention these. Sorry, because I don't think they go all the way through. Changes pay go to cut go. Constrains debt limit end runs. 3/5 vote to raise tax rates. Allows 2-minute votes. This one right here, 72 hours for bills. This could have something to do with the fact that recently there was that $1.7 trillion bill that they said was over 4,000 pages long, and it was presented to them that week. And they're like, we got to pass this now. Like, you can't sit up here and tell me that all of those politicians read through 4,000 pages that quickly and passed that bill. So it seems like they're asking for more time. And then dynamic scoring, ed labor, leading to education and workforce, and the new pandemic select committee. So do I agree with everything that they have here? No, I don't. But I will say this one member can force the vote to overthrow the speaker. I would say that's huge. To me, that's not fake. The title of this video is GOP Rebellion is Fake Populist Revolt, but I don't ever remember that group actually referring to themselves as populist. Let's go on.
On their own, these provisions aren't really good or bad, since it all depends on whether that new power is going to be used for good or ill. But again, this group has made it clear what they want to do with that power. And it's hostage taking, spending cuts, which will hurt the working class, and maintaining criminally low tax rates on the rich. In fact,
what that group will want to do with this power, and she says that it's hostage taking, but that's what the squad was supposed to do. Do you guys see the problem with the rhetoric? This is exactly what the squad was supposed to do. They were supposed to come into the Democratic Party and they were supposed to take it over. So to me, it's just to sit here and pretend like, and she said it's mainly just hurting social programs. It's not just hurting social programs. It's not just that. Cutting the defense budget is huge. That's a big one. We should have that on our list, unless you're not anti-war. I am anti-war. I don't know, man.
One reported concession requires a 3/5 vote in order to raise.
Something happened here with the video, Eric. If you can, let me go out and then go back in.
And it's hostage taking, spending cuts, which will hurt the working class, and maintaining criminally low tax rates on the rich. In fact, one reported concession requires a
low tax rates on the rich, but that's another thing. Like, we have to remember when Biden got into office, he continued Trump's tax breaks. He continued it. So I'm confused here.
3/5 vote in order to raise tax rates. I can assure you this provision does not have you, average taxpayer, in mind, but rather the goodies and giveaways that the ultra rich wish to benefit from in perpetuity. Listen,
that's both parties. Crystal. That's both parties. And Crystal knows this. She ran for office. Both parties are looking out for corporate interest. Both parties protect corporate interest above the American people. That's both parties that do that.
Trump the man and the movement lives on. He may well once again be the GOP standard bearer, but nearly all of the economic content of Trumpism was abandoned long ago, leaving literally anyone the ability to claim the mantle of supposed populism. Even
what does this have to do with Donald Trump? Like, Donald Trump is not president anymore. I'm going to make this very clear. Donald Trump is not president anymore. Donald Trump is not in office. Joe Biden is in office. And just because some of those politicians supported Donald Trump, that doesn't mean that they're going to follow every single thing that Donald Trump said. As you see, or as you saw, Marjorie Taylor Greene was not on board with forcing the vote against Kevin McCarthy as speaker. She was actually for Kevin McCarthy. So that doesn't mean that they're going to believe everything that Trump says and follow everything that Trump tells them to do. The point that I'm trying to make is this. What you do have to give them credit for is the fact that, unlike the Squad, they actually operated as a block. They stood together. Yeah, you had MTG on the outside, but they had enough numbers to actually make a difference and to get what they wanted. Whether we liked what they wanted or not, they used their leverage, and the Squad did not. That's the point that people need to bring home here. And I saw a previous video from Breaking Points 2 where she didn't even mention the words force the vote. I don't know. It's like the shame thing. If you say force the vote or whatever, depending on what side you're on. Oh, don't bring up those words, force the vote. When people like Crystal agreed with force the vote at the time. So for me, it's just, there's too much focus on what they got instead of more focus on the strategy that was used, which was actually a strategy from the DSA handbook that the Squad was supposed to do, and they didn't. In fact, for the most part, since they've been in office, the Squad has not been operating as a block. Cori Bush told us herself when she said, we are individuals. We vote alone. Let's go on. We'll finish this up, and then I want to show you another clip.
And as they gnash their teeth in favor of a raft of plutocrat-friendly policy priorities, fighting the powers that be feels like a populist revolt when given a 30-second gloss on cable news. I, too, enjoyed watching Kevin McCarthy's repeated humiliation over and over again. But what was won is ultimately a more hardline entrenchment of capital and the same old policies that create socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for everyone else. And Sagar, the way that the Republican Party has...
And to sit here and to ignore... Like, this is why, I don't know. For me, I'm sitting here and I'm like, for her to just pretend like the Democratic Party doesn't do the same damn thing, because the Democratic Party is also for socialism for the rich. Let's be clear. Even the whack ass Progressive Caucus, even some of those members aren't for Medicare for all. Even some of those members aren't for a Green New Deal. So I'm not sure why Crystal is framing it in such a way to make it seem like only Republican Party is for socialism for the rich. That's the Democratic Party too, which Crystal still continues to operate out of.
It's really been able to... Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully...
So this piece here, beat corporate media, but you sound like corporate media. Like, really, what happened to Breaking Points? I want to show you this segment right here. I'm going to show you the difference from what Crystal said. And let me show you what Ilhan Omar said. Now, this is, let's listen to this. I want to make sure I got this timestamp right. Okay. Listen to what Ilhan Omar said about her actually agreeing with Matt Gaetz on a particular issue. Let me make sure I go back just a bit. Oh, it's a tweet, so it takes a second. Give me a second. I just feel like So many people are seeing that they had this opportunity. And you don't have to agree with what they asked for. That's my thing. Listen to this piece here, what Ilhan Omar says in reference to agreeing with Matt Gaetz on certain concessions. Listen to this.
With you, there's that picture that you're so aware of at the moment, and he was talking with a lot of different representatives during those 15 votes. During this moment, what was he saying to you?
Well, I have to say that photo was a whole mood.
Yeah, it was.
We, certainly got the opportunity, I think, in those long 4 days to have conversations to get an insight on what some of the holdouts on the Republican side in regards to the speaker vote were thinking about the things that they were negotiating for and how ultimately the vote will shake out. And one of the conversations Matt and I had was about what it would take for him to actually cast a yes vote for McCarthy. And he said that wouldn't happen. And it certainly did not happen. So.
Was he saying that, did he give you a list of more things, or was he saying we had everything right now and we're just holding out? Was there any sort of specificity that you can share with us?
I mean, he certainly was going through the list of the things. Some obviously seemed like they were already on the table and negotiated for before we even got there. And he certainly didn't seem that there was more on a list that would actually get him to vote yes. And we certainly discussed some of the things on the list that, that we can be excited about. And so we'll see if the
some of the things that both of them can be excited about on the list.
Rules package comes to fruition, and what that would mean for those of us in the minority, obviously cuts to the Pentagon budget is pretty exciting for folks like me who are putting up amendments to do so. I also think the church style committee that they are thinking about to look into if there has been any violations of First Amendment rights of Americans by the FBI and others also interests me. So we'll see.
So here's Ilhan Omar saying that she actually agrees with those, at least those two concessions, looking into the FBI about the First Amendment rights, and then also cutting the defense budget. Now compare that to what Crystal said. Look, if you think it's just me, let me show you something. Look at some of the comments. Look at some of the comments on this video. Let's go down to, look at some of the comments. They're not good. Regardless if you feel it's fake, they got some really positive concessions. That has 133 likes. This one. So they held out to get back some agency and voice for individual members and constraining the top-down system that existed. This is bad. How? They literally cut McCarthy and the Speaker of the House role down to size. The House will now have more transparency in legislating and fewer opportunities for slipping crap in under the radar of the public. I'm not seeing how this is a bad thing. Sounds to me Crystal is advocating for the status quo, which has worked so well for the average citizen. Over 223 likes. That was the same impression that I got. Keeping things the way that they are. There's more. Crystal trying every way to cover for the squad. It's sad. 139 likes. Imagine Crystal's reaction if the squad had done anything close to this. I've been a follower of KB for most of her career. I love the fact that she stuck to her morals no matter the cost. This is truly sad to watch. Guys, I'm not making this up. Most of the comments under this video are bad. If you think it's just me. So what happened to breaking points? Because something changed. She's Black said she knows exactly what she's doing. This is what she is paid to do. She is covering for Democrats. Crystal is not on the left. She and others are right of center. Delthea said, hey, Dem Party, what have you done for me lately? Mr. Doug 41, thanks for the super chat. Thank you for giving the Freedom Caucus credit. Crystal is being totally unfair because she is jealous. The squad she championed are fake and the fighters she wanted are on the wrong side. And thank you for the super chat. And speaking of on the wrong side, you'll see in this clip here, this is on MSNBC, and this clip is from Case Study QB. Listen to how they're talking about that. Basically, they studied what the squad was supposed to do and decided to do it themselves.
For instance, in June, you published a very prescient article about the MAGA squad and their growing influence over the GOP, writing how they're, quote, spent the past year building their power, and now they're preparing to wield it. If McCarthy or any other Republican wants to be speaker, he's going to have to go through them, and he's not getting their votes without meeting their demands, so you wrote. Now that we've seen, well, that's what happened, what might be next for the MAGA squad and its grip over the GOP? You sort of intimated what was possibly going to happen in the future, in that we're going to go through the same debate about who's going to be their leader.
Now they're called the squad. You see how this works?
Yeah, well, and, you know, I think what we saw over the past week was that they were saying these things out in the open, members like Matt Gaetz, but Kevin McCarthy really either wasn't taking them seriously or didn't think he was going to need their votes. And what we saw play out is that he needs to take seriously their demands, and that they really have been studying the procedural rules and all of these things so that they are ready to exert their leverage. You know, they were studying the squad of the left. They were studying all of the tactics and procedures, and we saw them put those to work over the past week's worth of votes, and they're ready to keep doing this. So Kevin McCarthy is going to be operating with a sort of Damocles hanging over his head, whether it's in the form of that one-member motion to vacate that the holdouts secured, or whether it's all of these other concessions. They are going to be using those to, as they put it, enforce the terms of the agreement.
They studied the squad. So they were students. They studied what was supposed to be done by the progressives and wasn't done, and thought, how can we use that to our advantage? Or maybe thought, well, hell, if they're not going to do it, we should do it. I think the squad members should be embarrassed. Why is it that for whatever reason, the Democrat politicians don't feel like they have to fight for us? Is it because that possibly their constituents continue to return to the polls to vote for them every time just because they're not red, regardless of what they say they're going to do? And is it because that maybe possibly Republican voters, their constituents, or Republican politicians, their constituents actually hold them to task? Maybe their constituents actually do want them to do what they're going to do, and if they're not, they'll vote them out. Is that a possibility? Something to think about.